going to take you as far as you could go anyway. Can turn into something that you do kind of aimlessly, chance to socialize, something you kind of hang on your ego as an adornment, that sort of thing. But in Tokusan's case, he had spent years studying the Diamond Sutra, which has a lot of profound wisdom in it. And I think it would be safe to say that there was a lot of wisdom rooted in his mind, just under the surface, just waiting for the right moment to blossom. So you don't have to know everything about whatever religion you practice. You don't have to be a scholar. But you should try to know enough of your religion's teachings to give your spiritual practice a foundation. But knowledge by itself is not awakening. To know about a thing is not the same as knowing the thing. These old Zen masters would say things like, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. And by this they mean not to get hung up on the religion part, but try to experience truth directly. I did a meditation retreat once with a Zen master from Texas, and in her talks she kept talking about tasting the Dharma. And that might sound a little weird, but it makes sense if you think about it. Imagine an expert on strawberries who's never eaten a strawberry. You could read books and books and books about strawberries and their history and their horticulture and their role in the arts and everything that you could learn, but if you haven't tasted one, you can't really say that you know strawberries. And it's the same with any spiritual path. You can read all the sacred literature and recite scriptures and memorize things, but that's like having the base of the chalice without the cup. I was talking last week with a college student who had visited White Sands, and because she was writing a paper about Buddhism. And they required her to visit a temple and to interview a practitioner, and she got stuck with me. And she was a Christian, but she was having some doubts that I think she hadn't really completely expressed yet, and trying to find a new framework for her faith. And so I suggested that she focus on practice for a while and not worry so much about belief. I'm not an expert on any other religion. I'm not really even an expert on mine, but I'm working at it. But from my Buddhist perspective, I would say that someone could recite the Bible from memory forwards and backwards, but if they're not trying to be one with Jesus, they can't really know Christianity. So once you have the foundation of knowledge and the cup of practice, you have this space which can be a container for your truth. And I'm going to call that space faith. In Buddhism, faith arises from understanding and practice, and from the openness that's created by those two processes. And sometimes you'll find people who know a lot and practice a lot, but their hearts are full of prejudices and preconceptions. I swear I can speak English. There's a story that I've probably told up here before, but I'll tell it again because it really encapsulates this very well. There's a samurai who has to learn about tea. He's been invited to tea. And tea in Japan, in this sense, is very, very ceremonial. And you have to do everything just right. It's a real kind of meditative practice. And he has no idea what to do. And so he goes to a tea house to get the master to teach him tea. So when he gets in there, he's already mad. Tea houses were constructed so the door frames are very low, so you have to bow coming in. Well, this is a samurai. He didn't want to bow, but so he has to do it to get in there. So he's already ticked off. And the master comes out and says, "What do you want?" And he says, "I need you to teach me about tea, and I need you to do it right now." And the master says, "I'm not going to waste my time trying to teach you about tea. I'm not going to be able to teach you anything, not with an attitude like that." Well, the samurai says, "You teach me about tea or I'm going to cut you in half," which they could do, these guys back then. You know, they had that kind of power. There wouldn't have been any consequences. So the master says, all right, sit down. Calm down. I'll make you some tea. So they sit. The master very mindfully makes tea. And then he's very mindfully pouring it into this samurai's cup. And it gets higher and higher, and it gets to the brim, and it overflows onto the table and into the samurai's lap, which of course makes him mad. So he jumps up and he pulls his sword and goes, "I'm going to kill you." And the master says, "Look, you're like that teacup. If you're already full, I can't put anything else in there. If you can't empty yourself out, we're just going to make a big mess. And the master got it, and he sat down and he prepared to learn how to do tea properly. After the COVID shutdown started to happen, I decided that I'd explore my Zen connections a bit more, specifically by meeting with Zen Peacemakers International. They have long had a pretty well established online community, and their 3 tenets starts with not knowing. Not knowing, bearing witness, and taking action. And maybe I'll talk about all 3 of them sometime, but not knowing is a really interesting thing. You need some basic knowledge, and then you need to let go of what you think you know. Those can seem contradictory, but like that teacup, sometimes you have to empty it out to make room. You have to let go of what you think you have, let go of things like ideology and dogma, to make room for wisdom to flow into the space that you've created with knowledge and practice. And as you do this, you find you actually get more wisdom. We build a chalice that's kind of magical. The more wisdom we have, the bigger our foundation of knowledge grows, and the more refined our practice becomes, so our space gets bigger and bigger, and we can accommodate more and more truth. So to talk about this is kind of pointless, unless I tell you what you can do with your practice that maybe will give you a way to create some space. If you want to build your own chalice, you can start by determining what knowledge you need. A good place to start is coming to meetings like this and listening to talks. And you'll find that there are teachings you hear that make sense to you. There's a resonance. So don't just leave it at that. Oh, that was good. Analyze it. Make sure you understand it, and most importantly, make sure you understand what it means to you in your life. So to start with, there's some kind of Buddhist things I could tell you about that are universal enough that you could build on them. First, work with this idea that your experience of life, and whether your experience is good or bad, is not based very much on what happens to you, but mostly on where you put your attention. This comes from Japanese psychology, but it really draws from the Buddha's first teaching, where he talked about the truth of suffering, its cause, its cessation, and the path. We tend to attribute our stress to outside circumstances and other people, and they can certainly be contributors. But for the most part, our stress and afflictions are the result of the way our minds engage with our reality. And so if you work with your attention differently, you can move your mind in more skillful directions, and you'll have a better experience of life. So next time you're experiencing stress, see if you can stop trying to change the situation, even if the situation is yourself, and just change your attention instead. Here's another good one. The Buddha said there's no self, which means there's no self to esteem or rate, good or bad. But if you do good things, you get a good result. If you do bad things, you get a bad result. So in one of his key teachings, the Buddha said he spent a lot of time looking for some phenomenon that contains the essence of self and that exists in and of itself, and he couldn't find that. So when I use words like spiritual, I don't mean spirit as some sort of animating entity or soul that contains kind of your, that part of you that never changes. I mean that part of the self that's not just body and not just intellect. It is the seed of emotions and character, the activating or essential principle that influences a person's actions. So when we think about spirituality, our spiritual path, we can think about focusing our values on our highest purpose, those actions of body, speech, and mind that are encouraged with going beyond things like making a living, pleasing the ego, satisfying urges, but to doing things that really transcend that. I mentioned water on Buddhist altars. Water are a representation of merit. Again, you do a good thing, you get a good result. So the idea is that little good things create drops of merit that eventually become a stream carrying you to a... Then when things get going, just keep our feet moving. So hearing these things and doing them are different experiences. So I encourage you to put these things to work for yourself. See if you don't end up with a bigger cup that can hold more wisdom, and then taste the spiritual life for yourself. Thank you for your attention.